Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami. Dhammang saranang gacchami. Sanghang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi bhutang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi bhutang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. So welcome everyone. Welcome to the third Dharma talk in this series on mindfulness of breathing, the 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing. And tonight I'd like to continue with the discussion about the second tetrad, as we talked about last night. And in the scheme of things, just to remind you, I mentioned this last night as well, the scheme of things, the second tetrad correlates with mindfulness of feeling, or mindfulness of Vedana, or feeling tone. And possibly because we focus on lots of pleasant feelings. And as I mentioned yesterday, we don't focus on unpleasant feelings. We use unworldly or spiritually pleasant feelings as a tool to nourish our samadhi, to nourish our concentration. And we also focus on the second tetrad relates to the factor of awakening of joy and tranquility. So just to remind you, I mentioned this tetrad this morning and last night, and I'm going to say it again. However, the focus is on the 7th and 8th step. So one trains experiencing joy, I shall breathe in. One trains experiencing joy, I shall breathe out. One trains experiencing happiness, I shall breathe in. One trains experiencing happiness, I shall breathe out. One trains experiencing mental activity, I breathe in. One trains experiencing mental activity, I shall breathe out. One trains experiencing mental activity, one trains calming mental activity, I shall breathe in. One trains calming mental activity, I shall breathe out. So, what are we talking about when we say mental activity? And for the most part, it refers to thinking and mental creations. However, to be accurate, mental activity refers to the functions of the mind. And I'm going to use my hand just very briefly to talk about the functions of the mind. There's 5 functions. And I won't go into detail about these functions tonight, and I want to focus on one of the functions. So the first function of mind is feeling tone. Feeling tone, Vedana in Pali. The second function of the mind is perceptions, the way we recognize something. Like I'm looking at you guys and I'm recognizing our wonderful members of the retreat. I look at that, pointing my finger at the camera, I recognize camera. I have a name for it, it's a perception. In Pali, it's called sanya, and sometimes this word means memory as well. This one, and I'm going to say the Pali word because I'm going to use the Pali word a bit later. This one relates to mental creations and volitional fabrications, metal fabrications. In Pali, it's called sankhara. And I want to mention that term because there's a couple of meanings about sankhara that I think are important to relate. So that finger relates to mental creations, thinking, blah, 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 blah. This finger represents contact. And I'll explain more about contact tomorrow. This finger represents attention. So I'm focusing on this finger. My root finger, is that the root finger? Is that called the root finger? The root finger, yeah. So, and I'll talk about the other functions more tomorrow night when we're talking about mind. So the word sankhara has a number of meanings. In the passive sense, it most generally refers to conditioned phenomena. Conditioned phenomena refer to sankhara, these things that come about. But it also refers to mental phenomena as well as volitional formations. In a passive sense, it means that which has been put together. So there's this creation of things. And in an active sense, it means that which puts together. Kind of interesting. Another way we can describe sankhara is as fabrications, creating our creative mind. And it's how, and in this sense, sankhara is a creative aspect of the mind. So mental formations are the creative aspect of our mind. And it's how we create the worlds. Actually, we create worlds with our perceptions and our mental formations, our mental creations. These worlds that we believe to be solid and real are, for the most part, just our mental fabrications. I know this sounds a bit kind of weird at the moment. And I often make this example. It's like we're sitting here in Medlar Bath in a lovely retreat center, and you know, our homes are elsewhere and the world's out there. But if I ask you to think of your home, like bring a picture of your home in mind and your families and people you live with or don't live with, just this picture in your mind about your home. And I ask you, is that really your home? Or is it just a mental creation? How would you respond to that? Where is your home now? Is your home here? That picture that you have in your mind, or is it a mental creation? How do you respond? Is it a mental creation right now? Nobody's nodding or not.
Yes, Fanta.
Yes, Fanta. And I often think about the way the world is at the moment. Like, it's absolutely mad. But the way I think about the world is probably different to the way you think about the world. And my world, like if I read a lot of news, I create this really horrible picture of the world. But somebody else can not read the news and just be, you know, thinking about, yeah, the US and Ukraine and Gaza and all these different places of all these things happening. But if someone asks me, are they here right now? This world that you're talking about, is it here right now? Is it real? Well, we kind of know it's real. But to be honest, it's in my mind. It's a mental creation. I'm creating this world. And the way we do that is with mental fabrications. So, so I'm not denying the reality of the world out there. I'm not denying that you actually have a home, you know, wherever it is. And I'm not denying that there is an America and there is, you know, all this conflict throughout the world. I'm not denying that. But I'm saying, for the most part, everyone's world is different. And it's different because it's different because we all have different creations, mental creations about it. In other words, a thought about the world is not the reality of the world. And this insight, this thought about the world is not the reality of the world, or my thinking is not a direct readout of what's happening, has been used. That insight is called metacognitive insight in psychology, and it's about recognizing that the thoughts about ourselves are not really certain and true. And in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which is a particular approach that uses mindfulness, they utilized John Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness-based stress reduction and joined it with cognitive therapy. And that metacognitive insight was very helpful, because they could say that thoughts, my thoughts are not facts, not necessarily facts. And this is really helpful for people with suffering with depression, where they're tormented with negative thoughts about themselves and the world. They're tormented with thoughts of hopelessness, helplessness, and worthlessness. And through the meditation process, through just being mindful of the breathing, for example, or using body scan and open awareness, these different practices, these individuals that utilize mindfulness-based cognitive therapy were able to prevent relapse of depression, because they were able to short-circuit that tendency of ruminating. They were able to not believe in all these negative thoughts they have about themselves and the world, and in so not feeding into them. And they were able to find some peace from that torment of depression. So there's a variety of translations for the Dhammapada, which is a well-known book about, or a book of verses comprised of the sayings of the Buddha. And the first two verses of one translation go something like this: all mental phenomena have mind as their forerunner. They have mind as their chief. They are mind-made. If one speaks and acts with an unwholesome mind, dukkha follows just as the wheel follows the hoof print of the ox that draws the cart. All mental phenomena have mind as their forerunner. They have mind as their chief. They are mind-made. If one speaks or acts with a wholesome mind, happiness follows like one's never departing shadow. So mental phenomena, basically, I think you understand the meaning of that verse. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's like the way we think about things is so important. And the mental phenomena is pretty powerful. And for the most part, it's what we mean by mental activity is thinking, the blah, blah. And our human capacity to think is profound. We've created some marvelous things. Somebody had to think this building through, had to plan it. And look what we've got, this wonderful meditation hall. It's beautiful. And in fact, sometimes that second factor of the Eightfold Path, that I call right intentions, sometimes it's called right thought, or right thinking, or right thought, actually. So it can lead to great psychological freedom. But as you know, as you probably are well aware, thinking can also cause an enormous amount of suffering. And they can this thinking processes can sometimes be completely at odds with the way things actually are. And sometimes this thinking process can become completely out of control. And I'm going to mention a Pali term, and I'll mention it, and I'm mentioning it because I really like the sound of it. I think it's onomatopoeic. And it is papancha. And papancha means mental proliferation. Blah, 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 blah. Like we start with one thing, and it just ends up somewhere else. It sounds like what it means. It means the imagination gone wild and out of control, or mental proliferation. Often we think in terms of mental proliferations and one thought leading to another until the whole process becomes at odds with what is really happening. And there is a verse in the Sutta, it's in the Suttas, in fact, it's the Honeyball Sutta, which is it's a great Sutta. I mean, I won't go into details about it right now, other than to say this verse. Depending on I and form, I consciousness arises. In other words, seeing consciousness arises, depending on I and form. The meeting of the three is contact. Contact conditions feeling tone. What we feel, we perceive. What we perceive, we think about. What we think about, we proliferate. Because of what we have proliferated, we are oppressed by concepts, perceptions, colored by proliferation regarding the past, future, and the present. In other words, we are almost slaves to our thoughts. We're oppressed by many of our thinking patterns. They trap us. In clinical psychology, worry equates to thinking excessively about solutions to a problem where there may be a number of negative outcomes. It's different than calm and purposeful problem solving. Worry is, there must be a function for worry. I could probably talk about the evolutionary functions of worry somewhere, but it tends to be, it tends to narrow our vision, and we just see this and we get caught up in what ifs. Remember, I was talking about the what ifs yesterday. And rumination is very similar. Rumination actually means when a cow chews and swallows, it goes into one of its stomachs and it regurgitates that and chews it again and then swallows and goes back down and goes backwards and forwards. With rumination, and that's the term that psychologists use for this tendency to go over and over and over and over in events. It's a little bit different to worry, because worry is usually mostly future focused. Rumination, however, tends to focus on untoward events that are happening right now in our lives, or things that we've done in the past. So with rumination, we regurgitate and chew over an issue, but we do not arrive at any solutions because it's already done. And we focus repeatedly on the past, one's distress and its one's distress and its current circumstances. And this is different than pondering and reflecting, because in pondering and reflecting, we have some sort of processing. We can go through it. And we can sort of manage it. We can choose when we're going to ponder and reflect. And we can purposefully do this. But with rumination, it's out of control, really. We can control it ultimately, but it becomes uninvited, and it occurs like often when we wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and we're worrying about something, or we're ruminating about something. Why did I say that? Oh God, such remorse. And this rumination is a feature of depression, and you can imagine it. Oh, I was such an idiot. Why did I do it? Oh, why did I do that? Oh, I'm such a fool. Blah, blah, blah. And it comes up and up and over and over and over again. Worry and rumination are examples of a puncture or mental proliferation. They're an example of this, where something goes on and on and on until it becomes at odds with the reality of what's actually happening. The thinking itself is not a problem. The only problem we have with thinking is the way we relate to it. And sometimes we reify thinking. Reify means we're making something out of, we make it into something that it is not. we create something. We identify with it. Like we reify our thoughts. And coming back to depression as an example, I'm a failure. I'm a no good. I'm a wash up. Nobody loves me. We kind of reify. We start to believe this is our identity. We start to identify as failures or inadequate, totally inadequate or useless, and so on. And in ACT refers to acceptance and commitment therapy. It's a particular process. That's a particular approach to psychotherapy, which is really powerful. They talk about something called cognitive fusion. Cognitive fusion refers to taking our thoughts literally. And it's one of the causes of suffering. It's this process, cognitive fusion. And cognitive diffusion, by the way, is a healing factor in ACT. But I'll just go and I'll clarify a bit more about cognitive fusion. With cognitive fusion, we can note how we relate. We note how we relate to those objects. We relate to our thoughts. Often we grasp onto our thoughts and are carried away by these particular mental objects, and we become fused by them, fused with them, identifying with them, and we are, as it were, possessed by the object. We're possessed by this thought. We believe it to be true. And therefore, again, with depression, we may fuse with the thoughts that we are failures, useless, unlovable, worthless, hopeless, and helpless. And with anxiety, we may believe erroneous assumptions, such as things are dangerous and threats when they're not. So, how do we work with thoughts? How do we work with thoughts when they're causing us a lot of suffering? The Buddha mentioned 5 ways, but I think I'll mention these 5 ways towards the end if I'm not going over time. But I'll mention some other ways, the ways I use using therapy and also with myself and in the practice. And in many ways, I think I mentioned this last night, we can use a serenity approach or an insight approach to thinking. And just to remind you, I think I mentioned this last night, or it might have been this morning, I can't remember now. But a serenity approach to thinking, a problematic thinking. And I was pointing, yesterday I was pointing like over here, over here, problematic thinking like worry and rumination, is with the serenity way, rather than feeding into this with our attention, because what we attend to can become our reality. What we do is rather than feeding into the worry and rumination with our attention, we feed into something neutral or something uplifting. Like it's a choice between this or that, and we prioritize this. Remember me talking about that last night? Okay. So that, in many ways, that's the serenity way. You remember, what neurons that fire together, wire together, and use it or lose it. Where what we're doing is by focusing and attending to the wholesome and the positive and the helpful, we're creating neural pathways in that direction. Also, as they're reflected in our habits of mind or our patterns of mind. And in the insight way, what we're doing is we're being present with experience, and we're looking at, this negative stuff, but we're seeing it from a perspective. We're seeing it really clearly. We're seeing it as impermanent. We're seeing that it's not self. We're seeing that it's unreliable. We're seeing that it's suffering. And we have to kind of have training to do this. So usually it's good to kind of build up a bit of serenity first, and then exercise mindfulness at the difficult experiences, the difficult thoughts, for example. So I'm just going to ask you a question. Are you thinking about your home now, right now? Remember I asked you to think about your home? You're not. that's an indication that thoughts are impermanent, isn't it? Yeah. So that's a truth, that thoughts are impermanent. And we've talked about how thoughts are not necessarily facts. Is that right? Or, so that's seeing the unreliability, the uncertainty of thoughts. That metacognitive insight that I was talking about before, it's the realization that thoughts are not necessarily facts to be believed. So that's a feature of thinking, is that it's unreliable. And when I asked you about, say if I asked you to have a thought about yourself, how can I describe this? Say a negative thought. If one can see a negative thought is not the reality of how a negative thought about ourselves, like I'm a failure, it's not the reality of the way you are. You are not the reality of your thinking. If that makes sense. It is not self. It is not who and what you are. Does that make sense? Yeah. So when we practice mindfulness, say, as we've explained in the 4 establishments of mindfulness, we're looking at these 3 characteristics of existence: anicca, dukkha, anatta, or impermanence, the unreliable and uncertain nature of things, or the unsatisfactory nature of things, and the not self nature of things. What we see is actually, we see that we are not our thoughts. We don't have to believe in them. We don't have to feed into them. They are not direct representations of who and what we are. And this is liberating. So that's the insight way, and that's the surrender way. And what's helpful here is wise attention. Wise attention. There's wise attention and unwise attention. And some of you have heard me give these examples before when I've talked about wise attention and unwise attention. An example of wise attention is, well, by attending, I mean where we direct our mental energies and how we direct our mental energies. So wise attention would be unwise attention. I'll go that one first. And many of you have heard my example of chocolate cake in the fridge. Imagine there was a chocolate cake up in the fridge up there. And it was, it was only a quarter of a cake. And you open the door of the fridge and you saw this gluten-free, dairy-free, delicious chocolate cake, just the way you like it. Almost solid chocolate. And you could attend to it and think, oh, wow, nobody's looking right now. I could put this in my room and just have it all myself. You could look at it with greed. You could look at it with greed, and I would say that that's unwise attention. Like you're attending to it in an unwise way. You're being driven by the kilesa, the mental distortions of greed, ignorance, and hatred. Well, in this case, greed and ignorance, because ignorance and greed, the reason we become greedy and the reason we become, we crave after pleasure and we crave to push away displeasure is because we're deluded about it. We're not seeing the way it actually is. So unwise attention, looking at that cake, seeing how much I can get for myself and how I can keep it for myself. I can eat it later. Not let anybody see it. Wise attention would be, wow, look at that cake. Isn't that interesting? It's impermanent. Or I wonder how equally I could share it between our 16 Sangha here. If I cut a little bit and it's really rich, everyone will have a lovely, delicious piece of cake. I would say that that's more wise attention. Seeing something in a way where we're not driven by greed, ignorance, and hatred, but seeing it and attending to it in a way we're driven by the opposites of greed, ignorance, and hatred: generosity, kindness, and wisdom. So if we attend to worry as an example, or any thinking process, unskillfully, we can feed into it. You know that saying about the wolf? Remember the wolf? You know, I'll repeat it for those people who don't know this story. There's a story about American Indian warrior, and talking to his grandmother. And his grandmother was very wise and kind and generous, and he really respected his grandmother. He said, "Grandmother, how come you're so wise and kind and generous?" And she said to him, "It's like I've got two wolves. I've got two wolves. One wolf is mean and nasty. He's really aggressive, dangerous, horrible. And the other wolf is kind and wise and helpful and my dear friend. I don't feed the nasty wolf, and I feed the wise wolf." This is what we're doing with our attention. We feed into things with our attention. And you notice today, you might have noticed, by feeding into the experience of joy and happiness in a wise way, maybe this wasn't happening for you, but if it was happening for you, by gently holding it and nourishing it, it actually grows. The more we attend to something, the stronger it becomes, and it grows with that. So when we can choose where we put our attention and how we attend, we can see things with wisdom. We can see that thoughts aren't necessarily facts to be believed, and we can cultivate wisdom. I think the hindrance that is most closely related to thinking, in my view, is restlessness and agitation. Sometimes it's called restlessness and remorse. And I'm going to quote something I got from a book. I can't remember the author, but it was one of Ajahn. It was a book on hindrances by one of Ajahn Chah's disciples. I should get the actual name of him. But something about restlessness. Restlessness has the characteristic of disquiet, like water whipped by the wind. Its function is unsteadiness, like a flag or a banner whipped by the wind. And it is manifested as turmoil, like ashes flung up by pelting these ashes with stones. If you can imagine a fireplace, it's gone out, and you throw a stone into all this ash, and it just kind of goes up and flinders around like that. And in the comparisons, if you listen to those YouTube clips that I sent you, I would have been talking about restless, and I talked about all the hindrances. And there's an analogy of working with the hindrances as a bowl with water. And you're looking into the bowl and seeing your reflection in the water. So the analogy for the bowl with water and looking at your reflection for restlessness is it's being cut and rippled with the wind. Like you can't really see a clear picture because it's kind of turbulent, or it's actually kind of it's wavy and rough. So something more. Worry. They talk about worry here, but I think it's more like rumination here. It has a subsequent regret as its characteristic. Its function is to sorrow about what has and what has not been done. It is manifested as remorse. Its proximal cause is what has or what has not been done. It should be regarded as slavery. And perhaps you can remember last night, and I was kind of giving a lot of big download last night, but I was talking about freedom from the various hindrances, and freedom from restlessness and worry and agitation or rumination and remorse and regret is akin to being freed from slavery. That's the analogy that the Buddha made. And the Pali Canon says that the primary cause of restlessness and remorse is frequently giving inappropriate attention to unsettledness of mind. That's pretty cool, isn't it? In other words, not being discerning about what we reinforce or not reinforce with our attention. When we inappropriately attend to worry, for example, it just feeds in on itself and it proliferates. So coming back to that mental proliferation, what we feed into and what we perceive, we feed into with our thinking, it just becomes completely out of proportion. Some of the antidotes that are for restlessness and worry in the suttas, this is an interesting one, is impeccable ethics. In other words, not acting in a way that will later cause remorse. Now, I never say that when people come to me with something called generalized anxiety disorder, which the key feature of is worry, I don't give them instructions to go and be ethical. I don't do that. I don't say that too, because they'd never come back, I don't think. But I do say ways that they can calm their mind, ways they can relax, the ways they can become present. Because if we can be present, what we're doing, we're focusing on what we're doing, completely present. We're not feeding into the mental proliferations. I mean, that's a really classic way of dealing with worry. And it's also another way of dealing with worry is putting aside the worry for another time. Like you say to yourself, oh, I can see that this is something important to me. I need to think about this. I need to make some plans about this. So you note worry, and you say, yeah, there's worry, but not right now. I'm going to put it aside. I'm going to put it aside for my worry time. And usually what I say is, have a worry time when you sit down and just worry or plan, but compartmentalize it. Because the feature of worry is being caught up in it 24/7. It just kind of overtakes you. So if you can compartmentalize it, it's really helpful. And so the suttas also say calming the mind. Calming the mind is really helpful. And it's like, this ruffling feathers around, this ruffling of restlessness and agitation. It's like you can't actually focus. Your mind's all over the place. It's kind of going here and there, or it's caught up in something that's really distressing. It's like you're having samadhi with a really unwholesome thought pattern. So to be able to settle the mind, to be able to put those worries and concerns aside and calm one's attention or calm one's mental activity, actually often the problems we're worried about become resolved anyway. So I've got a script here, and I usually follow scripts, but then I kind of go off and give anecdotes and all sorts of other things. That's why I was talking so long last night, because I had all these points that I wanted to mention and just went off and gave other examples. So I've talked about how we've worked with serenity and insight. And I've talked about MBCT. And mindfulness really helps. Mindfulness really helps with difficult thoughts, because it tends to short circuit. When we're practicing mindfulness, we short circuit automatic thinking patterns. We can catch these thinking patterns at their core rather than feeding into them. Often these thinking patterns are habitual. And we can also short circuit proliferation and losing contact with the reality of a situation. We can notice, oh, I'm mentally proliferating. I'll just come back to what's the reality of what's happening right now. So you note it. You say, oh, restlessness and worry, or mental proliferation or rumination. You note it and you come back. You choose not to feed into it. You come back to what we're doing. And we change the relationship to what's happening with mindfulness as well, rather than taking things as permanent and reifying with them, and rather than thinking that they are direct readouts of reality, we let that go and we come back to the reality of things. There's another way of dealing with negative thoughts or difficult thoughts or painful thoughts or unrealistic thoughts. Actually, I'm gonna shoot through to something else here. I'm going to mention the 5 ways the Buddha talked about working with difficult thoughts, painful thoughts. And it comes from the sutta called, I got the Pali here, but I'm trying to remember what it is. Stabilizing thoughts, it's called. The Sutta on Stabilizing Thoughts. And in this, there's 5 points to recommend to deal with difficult thoughts. And it goes from, minor adjustments to pretty significant adjustments. And I don't recommend the last one, which I'll talk to you about. So the first one is substituting one thought for another. And this is basically like replacing one thought with another. Like you might be thinking, oh, I might take that chocolate cake back to my room and eat it all. And you think, oh, no, I'll substitute it with another thought. How about I think about how I can divide it amongst our fellow Sangha members? And this is related to like having a rough peg in a hole, like a carpentry hole, and you're knocking it out with a smooth peg. You're knocking out a smooth peg, and I think there's some joints here that you often see joints that are like pegs in carpentry. So it's knocking out the rough peg with a smooth peg. Another one is it's called forecasting. So that first one was called substitution. This next one is called forecasting. And what you're advised to do here is reflect on the consequences of that thought if you followed it through. And recognizing that feeding into it leads to suffering. It gives you the desire to do something different, to drop it, to not follow through with it. And the next one is shifting attention or withdrawing attention. This is similar to what we do with the serenity approach. We shift attention. And it's like you just don't feed into it. You just don't attend to it. They're saying here it's like completely closing your eyes to the thought. And I think it's like the serenity approach. It's just not feeding into it. You're feeding into this rather than that. You're ignoring that. Another one is, and we're moving on with different possibilities, and kind of a hierarchy of strenuous activities. Another one is taking the trace of the thought back to its root, like seeing how it came about, and investigating the trigger. You naturally slow down the mental stream from a frantic run to a walk, and then to a standstill. So this is kind of, I guess this is kind of like insight-based. It's like you're looking at this thing, you're looking at these thinking patterns, and you're going back to the root and looking at the causes and conditions so that you're not feeding into further proliferating. And this last one, it's called strong determination. Strong determination. And it's called the final emergency resort, yeah. And it's through using sheer willpower and physical resolve. And it's like clenching the teeth and pressing the tongue up against the palate and crush mind with mind. It's described in the Sutta. That's not what I got written here, but it's mind with mind to crush this looping. And it's been compared to like a strong man physically pinning down a weaker adversary. I mean, I think that those particular recommendations, you know, if I said that to my clients, I don't think it'd be advisable. It wouldn't be helpful so much. So I've adapted the ways I've talked about these processes so that they're perhaps culturally appropriate and what we use in psychology. Would you agree, Vika? Yeah. I've never told them to clench. Actually, I had a client come in one time, and she was telling me, it's like my mind is, it's like I really have to fight this. I really have to really grit my teeth and fight it. These thoughts that are coming in. And I said, can you just kind of step out of the road, or, you know, bend with them, or, you know, deal with them in a different way? She said, no, it's really like fighting. And I said, well, there's actually a stanza like that in the Sutta. And I brought this Sutta up. I gave it to her, and she said, oh, wow, fantastic. What a relief. I thought I was crazy. So it was really helpful for her. She's gritting her teeth and fighting mind with mind. So yeah. So I went on a retreat with Alan Wallace, and I think I've mentioned this throughout this retreat. And the retreat was a 2-month retreat in Thailand, and it was a shamatha retreat. Shamatha retreat means it was a retreat based on the practice of serenity. And on this retreat, we're given 5 objects for serenity practice. And interestingly, I found these 5 objects in the mindfulness of breathing practice. And the first 3 objects were related to breathing, like breathing in, breathing out, relaxing. The second object was attending to the abdomen as it rises and falls. The third object was paying attention to the nose tip in a very focused way, in a way where you're concentrating. We're emphasizing concentration. So these were first 3. The 4th one was called something like, well, it was called settling the mind in its natural state. And in this particular meditation, what we did, you practice this meditation with eyes open. And also what you do is you bring the focus of the object of your attention, or the focus of your attention, is mental phenomena, mental activity. So you focus on this mental activity, and what you're doing is you're not feeding into it. Basically, you're stepping back and you watch the show. So you're not feeding into it because it's a pleasant thought. You're not, you know, nourishing it with because it's pleasant and you want to buy in more of it. And you're not censoring it. You're not resisting it and struggling with it. You're just watching it come and go. And the analogy that Alan Wallace used was like a granddad, or just an older person, sorry, not necessarily a granddad, an older person sitting on a park bench in a park. Obviously a park bench is in a park, but sitting back and looking at everyone around them. They're looking at the children playing on the swings, their parents looking after them, and the clouds going across the sky and the trees waving in the wind. And they're just sitting back and watching it. That's an example of what we do with these thoughts that are coming and going. And there's some other analogies that have been used. Analogy I like is like sitting on a platform of a train, on a train station, and you're watching this cargo train go past. And it's very slow, but it's just going past. And in between the gaps of these carriages, you can see a beautiful view out there, a spacious view, that these carriages are going past. And it's like that with thoughts. And you're not chasing after the train and hopping on. You're not engaging with these thoughts, nor are you jumping in front of the train saying, stop. So what we're doing with this particular practice is just sitting back, watching the show. And sometimes I've talked about it like that with adolescents. I say, sit back and watch. It's like turning on the TV, turning the volume off and just watching the show. It's not you. You're not engaging in it. It's just images passing by. Another analogy that's being used, and a common one is used, is like watching clouds across the sky. They're kind of coming and going. Another one that's often used, and I mentioned this today in our group, it's like sitting, being on the footpath and watching a parade go by, and everyone's holding up signs about whatever. You know, there might be signs, you're stupid, or you're a failure, or what am I doing here? Or whatever it is, these signs are going past like thoughts. And you don't go in and join the parade and you pick up a sign and say this. You sit back off the parade and you just watch the parade go by. Yet another one is being a door person at a hotel, you know, with those, not necessarily rolling doors, but you open the door for the person, everyone that comes in. So you're a door person at a hotel. People, guests come in, they go up into the rooms, they find a place to stay, and you welcome them. You say, oh, thank you for coming, and hope you have a good day in your rooms up there. See you later. You don't follow them up to their room. And when they come down, they're going out into the street, catching taxis or buses or going for a walk or something like that. You wish them well, you open the door, wish them well, and let them go. You don't chase after them. This is a way we can kind of just be present with thinking. When Alan Wallace taught us this practice, I found it was like quite amazing, because you would have the experiences of samadhi. Like I would notice piti arise. I would also notice these other qualities that were arising, because I'm focusing on these mental objects. And at the same time, Alan Wallace would say this particular meditation practice is on the cusp of insight and serenity, because you're having a single object that you're focusing on, and also because my personal experience of it is it plumbs the depths of consciousness. All sorts of stuff comes up. Really, sometimes horrible stuff comes up. Sometimes memories of things when you're very young. It sort of goes into your deeper, the subconscious, perhaps. And this stuff comes up, and it gets really, what's the word? Insightful. So you develop insight. You get a clear understanding of the nature of thinking. So tomorrow, I'll be inviting you to the steps 7 and 8 of mindfulness breathing. And with this practice, you'll be invited, first of all, to be aware of mental activity in a way that I just described with Alan Wallace's settling the mind in its natural state. You just sit back and be aware. You watch mental activity, and you're neither engaging in it nor resisting it. You're not censoring it. You're not trying not to think that thought because it's a negative thought. You're not doing anything with it. You're just watching it come and go. And what you notice is that when you're not engaging in the thinking processes, they naturally begin to slow down. They naturally begin to calm down. This process is called settling the mind in its natural state, because what tends to happen is the knots that we have in our mind with our thinking processes, they seem to disentangle. They seem to get slower and clearer. And an analogy that I use, and I think Alan Wallace used this analogy as well. I'm not sure if he used this analogy or not, but I've heard it from other people using it. It's like there's this stream that's forming in the high mountains, and it's coming down the steep slopes of the mountains, and it's really turbulent. It's really, really turbulent and flowing very quickly. And, you know, it's like they're like our thoughts. And there is an analogy in another therapeutic approach called dialectical behavior therapy, where if you're having lots of thoughts, it's like you're standing under a waterfall, like all these thoughts are just coming past you. So I think about that with this analogy as well. So it's like these thoughts are originating in the high mountains, like streams, and there's going down rapids, and it's really turbulent. And then it starts to get more onto the slopes and develops a kind of wider streams, and it starts to slow down. And then it gets onto the plains, and it's really going slow, and it's a slow moving river. And it eventually reaches a lake, a very clear lake. And it comes to a stillness. It comes to stillness and clarity. It's a clear lake, and it stops. This is the analogy that I use for calming the mind, like that 8th step, breathing in, calming mental activities, breathing out, calming mental activities. It's like that. When we're not engaging with thinking, it naturally slows down and calms down. And the analogy that I use for the lake is the 9th step, which I'll give a talk about tomorrow night. And I might introduce it tomorrow during the meditation. I might introduce it. But it is, this 9th step is called breathing in, experiencing mind. Breathing out, experiencing mind. Bare. Uncluttered with thinking processes. So that's the 9th step. So thank you very much for your attention. And yeah, may we all practice well and find some peace with our mental activity. Yes. Not through clenching, well, actually, if you need to clench your mouth. Thank you.